Hi everyone, this is Rachel Navarro with Interface Children and Family Services. I am the program manager for our Family Violence Intervention Shelter Services and Response team. I've been with Interface for about 11 years now, working in family violence for the past 7 years. And my colleague Ruth is here if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Ruth Rodriguez. I am the program manager for the Family Violence Prevention Services. I'm happy to be with you. I used to be a mentor tutor myself in Southern California and a volunteer instructor out in the community in Brazil, and recently have joined Interface since 2009. So it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to the rest of our hour together.
So today we're going to be talking about what domestic violence is, what a domestic violence shelter is, what the impact of trauma on children is, and any tips that we have for you with working with youth affected by trauma. And we are going to have some time at the end for question and answer. If you have a question, feel free to type it in, and Natasha will read that off to us and we can answer as we go as well. So the definition for domestic violence or intimate partner violence, sometimes you'll hear it referenced as IPV. It's a pattern of assaultive and coercive behaviors which can include depriving someone of family and friends, of money. It has psychological abuse. A lot of individuals just think of the physical violence because that's what's portrayed on the movies and the news, but there's a lot more that goes along to it. There's stalking that's in there, sexual assault. Whether you're married or not, you do not have to be intimate with someone if you don't want to be. A lot of times it doesn't look like the stranger in the dark alley situation. It can be a lot of coercion. It's the, if you're not going to do it with me, then who are you doing it with? If you love me, then you're going to do this with me. Some of you may have seen this cycle of violence before. If you haven't, please, if you have, please bear with me. But it's going to start with that phase one. That's where the tension building is. You're walking on eggshells. You want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can in order to avoid a violent explosion, because maybe in the past the children weren't put to bed on time. Maybe you didn't have dinner ready on time, whatever it may be. So you're trying to make sure you do everything right. But eventually comes that violent explosion. That's where the verbal lashing out is. That's where the physical assault occurs, the sexual assault, whatever it may be. After that comes this honeymoon period where you're getting the, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to go get help. I love you. All these different promises. And when you have that intimate relationship, when this is someone you have children with, someone you dated, someone you're married to, once upon a time, there's this really great person you saw in them. Because if on the first date they were violent with you, you probably wouldn't have went on the second date. So you see that good side of them and you think, okay, they finally get it. They're finally going to make a change. But unfortunately, the cycle continues to go around and around until somebody leaves the situation. So I know a lot of you are working in different kinds of shelters, a lot of them being homeless shelters. Two of the main differences between a homeless shelter and a domestic violence shelter are the confidentiality. Because we don't have individuals coming and touring our shelter. The law enforcement doesn't know where our shelter is at. 911 operators do not know where our shelter is at. Even employees at our own agency don't know where the shelter is at. And that's all to keep everyone that's in the shelter safe, because unfortunately we all may know someone who's being affected by domestic violence. And so the least amount of people that know where the shelter is at, the better. The safety of the clients is extremely important because someone's probably looking for them. Someone's probably has maybe GPS on their phone, has GPS on the car, whatever it may be. So we don't want anyone actually finding them, so we make sure our shelters are kept extremely confidential. We don't disclose the names of anyone at our shelter, whether they're a child or the parent. We don't give any of that information out. So I have a question for everyone. And please use your answer box on the side of your screen to send your answer in. In a single day in 2007, how many children were living in a domestic violence shelter or transitional housing facility? And your responses can be A, approximately 5,000, B, approximately 8,000, or C, approximately 13,000? Go ahead and take some time to complete that portion of it. We'll give you another 30 seconds or so to send in your response.
It looks like people are sending in their responses right now, Rachel.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the answer is C. In a single day in 2007, there were 13,485 children living in domestic violence shelters or transitional housing facilities. The way that we got this number is that the National Network for Domestic Violence does a 24-hour census count once a year. So in 2007, when they did this count in that 24-hour period, there were 13,485 children across the United States living in a domestic violence shelter or transitional shelter. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ruth. Ruth, can you explain to us why the families and the children had to flee their homes?
Sure, Rachel. As you were sharing with us, you really set the foundation for the different types of abuse that a person can experience when they're in a relationship, whether they're in a dating relationship or they were married or they used to be in a relationship. And as you talked about, it could be emotional, it could be verbal, it could be physical. And the reason that we're talking about this is because children who live in homes where there is violence are also affected by the domestic violence that it's occurring between the parents or the partners. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is what we have called the continuum of exposure, and what children might be seeing, hearing, or maybe even being in the middle of is one, they could be seeing their parents fighting and yelling, and then we see the pyramid escalate. They might be part of a household where there is a lot of controlling behavior, or where they have a parent that's threatening to hurt themselves, or to hurt their other parent. The abuser may also be threatening to hurt or harm the pets that are in the family. Then we see the severity of violence increase once again, and the abusive partner or parent might be hurting the other parent with weapons. So a child might be seeing, hearing, or knowing that their parent is being chased around with a weapon. They might see their parent be strangled. And then at the top of the pyramid, unfortunately, some children have witnessed their parents experience serious injuries or even be murdered. So that is a continuum of exposure. With all of this said, I have a question for all of our participants. Now that you have more of an understanding of what domestic violence is and what it looks like, I'm wondering, how do you think that domestic violence affects a child's health and their school performance? So do you think that A, domestic violence affects a child's school, so this might lead to school failure? Or do you think B, it might lead a child to become tired and lethargic? Or could it be C, they might experience bullying or be the ones that are doing the bullying? Do you think it's D, they might have a short attention span? Could it be E, A, and C, or F, all of the above? So go ahead and select your answer. I don't think you fooled them there. So it looks like all of you are correct in saying that it is F, all of the above. Very knowledgeable crowd that we have here. So domestic violence does indeed impact a child's health and their school performance. And right now we're going to take a look specifically at what are the areas of a child's life that it affects. So today we're going to be talking about the challenges that you might be witnessing in the lives of children and teens, specifically in the social, emotional, psychological, behavioral, and physical aspect of their lives. We've chosen to talk about two age groups, children and teens, because those are more likely the folks that you will be working with when you come into the shelters and provide the tutoring. And we just want to point out that every child will experience domestic violence differently. They will have a different reaction or a different response than maybe their own sibling might have or another child that's in the shelter might have. So these are just some effects that we're going to talk about, but like we said, each child is unique. So starting off with how domestic violence might impact a child's health and their school performance, we see that it can definitely lead to school failure. And this could be because maybe the child is so worried about what's happening at home that it's really hard for them to concentrate at school. We also know that children that experience domestic violence are really too afraid to learn. Being in a traumatic environment really inhibits their brain functioning. So instead of accessing their frontal lobe, which is where all of the critical thinking takes place and all of the learning happens for us, they're living on survival mode. So maybe they're scanning the room and trying to figure out, am I safe here? Right? Because if they don't feel safe at home, chances are they might not feel safe at school either. Children also might be experiencing lower grade point averages, again, because they are so focused on just trying to survive and get through a lot of the violence that's going on in their homes. Another aspect that we want to focus on, and things that you might see while you're in the shelter, is that children might regress developmentally. So you might see them or hear about them doing things like bedwetting, even though they've been potty trained. Or you might hear that they've been having a lot of nightmares. For teens, what we see is some of them will tend to run away or choose to use drugs. We see this because a home is supposed to be where we feel secure and safe, and we have a sense of belonging. But if that's not there due to the trauma, they might try to find that somewhere else. For both age groups, we find that some of them take on a lot of responsibility, so they will, become like a little parent themselves, either to their brother or sister, or they might even try to take care of their parent, the survivor of domestic violence. We also see them learning some of that behavior that they watched, whether it was the yelling or the pushing, and they might in turn be themselves violence on school, or again with a brother or sister. You might also see them acting out or withdrawing and sometimes lying, and that's just so that they can avoid any kind of confrontation. Speaking of the physical impact that it can have on children and teens, is we see that across both age groups, they are constantly getting sick, and sometimes they have somatic complaints, which means they will often say, Mom or Dad, I don't feel good, my stomach hurts or my head hurts, and this is just their body's response to the trauma that's taking place. Sometimes they might hurt themselves, and that comes out like self-abuse, so they might start cutting or pulling out eyelashes or eyebrows. Again, and these are all adaptations to deal with the trauma that they have experienced in their home. Some of the social challenges for children and teens shows up in young children having a poor ability to develop social skills. This means that they might have a hard time making and keeping friends. They might have trust issues because, again, their parents, their home is supposed to be the most safe environment, but if that's not happening, then that might make it really hard for them to just reach out and make friends. With teens, you might see them themselves experiencing dating violence, because we know that the biggest what is going to be the highest indicator of somebody being in a violent relationship is if they have witnessed it themselves in a home. So often teens can be really vulnerable if they have experienced this trauma by either becoming an abuser in their own dating relationships or being the victim. And an alarming statistic is that every 1 in 5 female high school students has reported being either physically or sexually abused in their dating, high school relationships. And for both of them, they have some trouble regulating emotions like anger. Some of them might be a little bit passive, and that's just because in their home that they've learned that, they don't have a voice. They might be too afraid to speak up. And so all of this will show up either academically or just in different social settings. And they might also, be a bully or be bullied themselves. Psychologically, what we see in children and teens is that some of them have what is called confusion and conflicting feelings. So they might feel torn about their parents. You know, they have love for both of their parents, but they might feel like they need to choose between one or the other. Sometimes children might identify with the surviving parent more and feel like they need to protect them, and sometimes children feel that they need to imitate, you know, the negative patterns of their parent that was abusive. They might also be really angry about what they witnessed in their home, or angry about some of the consequences, or, you know, angry about having to be uprooted and leaving their home and coming to a shelter. They might be really ashamed of what happened. Some of them, again, because they're in a lot of pain and they're just trying to make sense of what has happened, they might try to commit suicide. Some of them might be experiencing depression. They might blame themselves and say things like, you know, if I had only done my, you know, homework this way, or if I had only been home by this time, then, you know, mom or dad wouldn't have had this fight, because at this age they don't really understand that it's not about them, it's about the two adults in the relationship. So why are we talking about all of this? Trauma is a very serious and heavy topic to talk about. Working with survivors can also be difficult sometimes, just because it is such a sensitive issue. But what Rachel and I are here to talk to you about today is just the fact that you make a difference. So we just really want to thank you for your commitment to go out into the shelters and just lend a really supportive ear to the children and the families that are there. As Marianne Williamson says, you know, in every community there is work to be done, in every nation there are wounds to heal, and in every heart there is power to do it. And we believe that this is what you all are doing through School on Wheels. And really what children in this environment need is just one trusting, caring, you know, adult or person that can provide emotional support for them. And so all of your efforts will really help to mitigate and reduce the impact of the trauma. So we have some tips for you and some things that we believe might help you in the line of work that you're doing. And one of them is just, you know, recognizing that each of us has a bad day, right? If you can just stop and think for a minute right now, the last time that you had a bad day and, you know, how that made you feel. I know for me, when I've had bad days, sometimes my response is to be short and snappy. And when I'm, you know, talking to a person, maybe I'm not giving them my full attention, or not being fully present because I'm still carrying whatever it was that happened earlier. But what's needed is for us to be able to let go of that, so that when we come to work with the students that are at the shelter, we can just give them our 100%. So what we offer to you is the tip that includes integrating a transition activity before you meet with your students, so that you have that space of just releasing, you know, whatever it was that happened, and the child doesn't have to be the one on the receiving end of any kind of, you know, negative or low energy mood. So for some of us, that might look like, you know, taking deep breaths before we come into the shelter. For some of us, that might be listening to music. For others, that might be just calling a friend and just venting or talking with somebody for a while. For every person this might look differently, so I really encourage you, if you have any tips that you actually want to type in the chat box for one another, you know, how you can just integrate this into your schedule, that would be really helpful. Something else that we recommend is really getting to know each child's name that's in the shelter and calling them by their name and greeting them, you know, when you see them, and saying goodbye, you know, with the child's name after, you know, you're ending your session. And this is really going to help them, you know, feel like you're remembering who they are and that they matter. Being on time is also really important, just because this helps to show consistency and lets them know that you're someone that they can count on. It helps them to rebuild trust. And, you know, just going in each day to the shelter, suspending any kind of judgment, and recognizing that the child you're working with is more than their circumstance or their situation. They're a whole person. Also, this one can be tough sometimes, recognizing that the shelter is just a temporary living situation, right? So I know as humans, often we need closure, but we might not always have that in the way that we think we can. Working with students, they might not ever say goodbye. Rachel can share a little bit more about that, but sometimes the children and their families in the shelter just leave. They move on. They find a different safe place to stay. You know, they stay with new family or friends, or they relocate states, and you might not have the opportunity to say goodbye. So finding a way to make that closure happen for you, whether it's talking with shelter staff or maybe your supervisor at School on Wheels, might be helpful. Also, we suggest not taking it personal. A lot of the students that you will be working with are, you know, in adapting, you know, and overcoming the adversity that they have lived through. So any kind of adaptations or coping skills that you might see them display, you know, whether it's them being rigid or whether it's them lying, don't take it personal. They are doing their best to overcome what they have lived. And maybe most importantly is taking care of yourself. Making time each day or before you meet with the students or after you meet with the students to do something for yourself, because, you know, we're not taking care of ourselves. It's really hard for us to help take care of others. So those are the tips that we have for you, and we have a handout that's available that gives more tips in case you're interested in knowing how you can best work with students affected by trauma.
Yeah, and I'll email out all the materials from this workshop, and actually we had one tip from a tutor, so they do yoga before they tutor, so that's a really good idea.
How fun.